your lecture. But before that, welcome everybody that is around the world that is following us, that is connected with us today. And welcome all the disconnect spirits too that are here trying to learn about worshiping. And before we go to Rafael, I just want to thank everybody who has been helping TSS along this last 2 years and a half during the pandemic. And we are really grateful and looking forward to going back to our presential lectures and works at the TSS. So Rafael, could you please give us the initial reading and the prayer?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. So I'll be reading, I'm going to be open at random, a message from the book Happy Life, from Joana de Angelis and Divaldo. And then I'll be doing the initial prayer. Allocate some of your time to serving your community out of fraternal charity. Free time is a dangerous mental space. Offer such time to your neighbor or to some charitable organization dedicated to rebuilding lives. Small contributions produce the miracle of grand achievements. Never excuse yourself from doing volunteer work. There is much suffering waiting for help and understanding. Dear Lord, our Father, Jesus, our Master, our friend, light that guides our way. We are extremely thankful for this new opportunity to speak about Spiritism, to distribute this doctrine that brings so much hope, so much love, things that we are in their need in this particular time in our history. And we ask you, dear Jesus, to bless us all, especially Tiago, during this lecture, so that his words may sink in our hearts and may help us to put into practice your teachings during this week to come. Thank you. So be it.
So be it. Thank you, Rafael. Thank you, Tiago. And it's on you now.
All right. So I think we've learned about worship with what Rafael just did for us. So then we don't need to say anything else. All right. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Rafael. Thank you, Jo, for moderating our platform. And here we are today talking about worshiping. And the question that has been presented to us, and I usually like the questions, right? Like the question, it feels like it was presented to me. What am I going to talk about that? What can I learn about worship so then I could help to answer that question? And then let's see if we can all answer together with the information that we've gathered. Is there a right way? We can all guess. And I think most of us that know a little bit about Spiritism will think, well, the most important thing is to do from the heart. So then probably know that it's not necessarily a right way. So let's confront that assumption then throughout this hour that we're going to be together. I will probably share my screen as well with you. So sometimes you will not see me, but you will see the slides. So I will start sharing one specific slide talking about the definition of worship. And then we're going to try to understand, first of all, what the world knows about worship. And from there, we are going to jump right away into Spiritism and trying to see that parallel between the information that we have today, if we open the dictionary, what worship is. And then we go to Spiritism, open, and then try to understand what worship is. So I will share my screen right now. Oh, I cannot share my screen. That's okay. It's just saying here, the sharing screen is disabled, but that's fine. I will then say what I discovered from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Worship, according to the dictionary, is reverence, respect, and admiration offered to a divine being. There we have it. So the dictionary tells us that worshiping will be a reverence. So then we will revere a divine being. We will show respect and admiration. And also it says that, oh, I should have permission now. Okay, great, thank you. I have permission now. So I will. I hope everybody can see. There we have it. Great, great. So here we are in the dictionary. Reverence, respect, and admiration for a divine being. And the second part is also very important, and I put it here because we're going to talk a little bit more about it. It is also the act of expressing such reverence. So one thing is that reverence, respect, and admiration that we have here inside, and that is very important. How we do that from within. But also seems to be important to this dictionary, how we do it, how we put that reverence outwards as well. And here we are going to point out two different definitions. And I think those definitions are intertwined. One is the definition of worship. But usually, how do we name worship? How do we say, what do we say usually, let's worship? No, we say what? Let's, like Sandra asked Rafael to do what? To worship in the beginning? No, ask to pray. So then we have those two definitions that are usually intertwined. So here we have a little bit of a forming, taking shape, worshiping, and also that act of expressing such reverence, which usually we would say is the prayer. The prayer is the way that we act in reverence. So let's continue. And then we go to the Spirit's book. And then let's look at what the Spirit, in the Spirit's book, Allan Kardec does ask very directly, what does worship entail? And the spirits are very clear. Worship is the lifting up of the thought towards God. Here we are. It is lifting up our thoughts towards God. So we can say that worshiping means drawing ourselves, right, closer to God. That is the way that we approach ourselves, that we communicate, that we direct ourselves to God. And of course, this is very broad, this is very, very open, right? So we are going to understand a little bit why, first of all, worshiping is important. Why do we see worshiping as something central also in Spiritism? And we will understand, if we go back to the Spirit's book, we will learn about the divine or the natural laws. And the first law that has been presented to us is the law of worship. So that is the first one that has been presented. Allan Kardec will ask, well, is the worship a result of an innate sentiment or the product of education? So, of course, that Allan Kardec is probably helping us to come closer to that idea that if it is a natural law, there is something natural about it. That is something that has been, brought to us by God instead of simply the idea of education. And I think when Allan Kardec is also bringing the idea of education, we're thinking about we learn also how to pray, right? Depending the religion, depending the faith that we develop, depending the education that we have at home, how we are brought, usually there is a way to do that. Remember, we're talking about not only the reverence, but also how we do it. And there are ways that we can learn how to do that as well. However, the essence is an innate sentiment, like that of the sentiment of the divinity itself, right? And also, of course, that Allan Kardec will ask to then corroborate that idea that, worshiping is of the divine law, of the natural law. Does worship have its source in natural law? And yes, it is part of the natural law, the spirits would say, because it is a result of the innate sentiment in humankind. In every single time in humanity, there was one way or another of worshiping. Because since the dawn of time and since humans exist, humans have been marveled and in awe of everything that they didn't understand and that was beyond and above themselves. I will just stop sharing my screen here so that we can talk a little bit. Oh, now we'll stop sharing. Okay. So here we are talking about the idea that there has never been in history one people that did not have a form of worshiping, a form of revering and respecting and admiring anything that was beyond themselves. But the primitive humans, how would they do that? They would look at the phenomena of nature and they would try then to revere and to worship those elements because they were all powerful. They would have the ability to kill them, the thunder and the storms and the sun and the waters. All of that were elements of worshiping because the primitive humans didn't have the understanding. They didn't have the notion of the elements of the nature and the way that the laws of the nature would preside in their lives. So all of those elements were considered what? Gods. So they would revere, right? And in the first human groups, the first tribes, the first families, each one of them would have their own way, their own system of worshiping as well. And also they had their own personal gods, depending what was important for them. If some of them were linked with taking care of cattle, probably their gods would resemble the gods of animals or animal gods. For those who worked in the fields, that would have to do with it, what we call today, right? Even Mother Nature, right? And they would worship it because they would also be afraid of them. There was a lot of fear involved with worshiping because a lot of those phenomena they didn't have control over because they didn't understand, they didn't know where those powers would act upon them, for instance. So they would act on not only reverence and respect, but also fear. Also, if we look at more modern civilizations like in Egypt, like in Greece, like in Rome, it is interesting because then there was a form of organization of those ways to worship. And then we understand that one of the ways that they did it was the polytheism, which was a system of worshiping many gods. And those gods were not anymore only linked with nature, like with the primitive humans, but they were anthropomorphic. What does that mean? that instead of worshiping the elements of nature, they would start then creating those gods with human characteristics, with human traits or superhuman traits, with the same virtues, with the same vice, with the same imperfections, with the same passions as humans. However, gods. So we see the evolution of worshiping from the elements of the nature to then bringing the image of the gods closer to who we are as humans. And then we have the Hebrews that through Moses, for us at least, but then monotheism existed before Moses, but Moses helped the Hebrews to bring that system, organize that system, which is the monotheism, which is presenting the idea of not multiple gods, but only one. So then we wouldn't centralize our thoughts, our feelings, our respect and reverence to one only God. And Moses helped to create several laws and rules in order to help organize the people to follow the monotheism for the cult of one only God. And still in Moses, not only through love, but still through some fear as well. The fear of being punished by this divinity that potentially would then destroy us if we didn't have that. And many of those practices were rituals. There were sacrifices. There were altars, material sacrifice. So then here we have also that progression, the evolution from outward rituals. And here we are still, we are learning that from the outward rituals and practices, we start coming within. So then those practices start becoming not only necessary from the outward perspective, but the spirits will start telling us that it is about how we feel inside and how we communicate inside with the divine. And the spirits would say, there are different forms to do that, because there are different peoples, there are different cultures, different ways to understand life and God and the divinity. Therefore, there will be different ways that we can worship. Right? So, when we talk about worship, we understand the different forms to worship. And here we come to prayer. And the Spiritism will help us a lot to understand, what comprises prayer. Because the prayer is then the vehicle of worship. It is the way that we worship. So let's think together about it. Again, the Spirit's book, and I will share the screen once more so then we can look at how in the Spirit's book we have that organized and we have all codified for us to understand better. So here we have prayer is an act of worship. Praying to God is thinking of God, is drawing nearer to God, putting oneself in communication with God. So if worship is the reverence, respect, and admiration, prayer is the way, the vehicle to communicate that to God. It is our way to have our conversation with God. It is through our prayers. And the spirits will do more. The spirits will tell us even what we can do when we pray. How we can pray. And then we come back to the question, is that a right way? Is that a right way? Well, there are ways, the spirits would say, and probably there are ways that are better than others. But first, what can we do when we pray? Can we ask anything? Can we say anything? Can we have any kind of conversation with God? Well, in essence, we can talk anything with God because God is our creator. God will listen to us. But when we pray, there is intention. When we pray, there is need, right? That is something that brings us to a little bit closer, as close as we can get, to the importance that God has for us. And we barely can fathom how important God is for us. But the first thing that the spirits tell us is, first thing that you do when you pray is to praise. So let's understand, what does that mean? First of all, it is that recognition of the greatness, the love of God for us. Recognize how much we need God, and all that God has created in order to help us evolve. So if we think that we have an entire universe, remember, there are many dwelling places in my Father's house. We have the entire universe. That is our greater home, populated by spirits. We have the planets that welcome us in our multiple reincarnations. And this is all God's creation. This is all thinking of God's creature. Because in order for us to progress, we need a lot. We need all the proper conditions to continue living. Even for our existence on earth, all the physical laws that preside our lives, all the fine balance that we need to have preserved in order to continue existing, comes, in essence, from God, from our Creator. And in praying, in worshiping, it is important to recognize that greatness and all that has been granted to us as concessions for us to continue evolving. What else? And then the spirits say, ask. You can ask. We need. We're not perfect. We're not self-sufficient. We need help. And that is an incredible act of humility for us as well. Understanding our place in the creation and understand that need. Can we ask him what is important for us? Yes. Can we ask him what we believe is important for us? Yes, of course. But the catch here is, sometimes when we ask, we may receive a different answer than the one that we were expecting. Why? If God is perfect and we are not, God understands what we need. But it doesn't mean that we don't need to ask, because in that intention, we draw ourselves closer to God. We establish more and more a closer relationship with God, because that is our destination. Come close to God to finally see and understand God through having those needs met, understanding how to meet our needs of growing, of evolving, of getting rid of our imperfections. How can we know that? How can we see, a concrete example of how to ask? And here we have one of the greatest examples of how to ask God. It is when Jesus is about to be arrested. After the Last Supper, after the last gathering that Jesus has with his disciples, he goes to the Gethsemane to pray. And we see in the gospel that actually Jesus is constantly going from time to time to different places to find remote places, high places to pray. And here we have all the symbology that we can take from all of that. Going to high places, on top of mounts to pray. The symbology is we need to elevate ourselves. Where do we believe that God is? In heaven. Where is heaven? Usually above. And here we are, Jesus going up to the mountains and to the hills to pray, drawing himself closer to God to pray. And in the Gethsemane, Jesus prays. And he teaches us through this prayer that in times of sorrow and trouble, we are allowed to ask for help. He tells the disciples, specifically Peter, James, that he takes together with him, and he says, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me. And he says, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. And here we can ask. Jesus asked to constantly. Because Jesus, more than anybody else, knew that by asking, we would receive what is important for us in that moment from God. Not only that, Jesus prays in that moment 3 times. And we know that for their culture, for the Hebrew culture, the number 3 was very important. It signified the multitude. The multitude. So pray without ceasing. Pray in abundance. And he prays for the second time, my Father, if this cannot pass, unless I drink it, your will be done. And for the third time, he prays in the same fashion. Jesus is telling us there is no shame in asking God for help. We all need. It is a practice of the humbleness and humility that is so important for us to combat the vices that we have, to believe that we are better than others, to believe that we don't need help, to believe that we are superior. Every time that we confront ourselves with the magnitude that God is, we then go back to ourselves to understand really who we are. We are beings in need. And finally, to thank for everything. To thank even when we don't receive what we asked for, because God knows what we need. And God will grant us as God always granted us. Now, again, we have Jesus telling us from the outward rituals that we have seen that Moses helped people to develop, Jesus comes to develop from the outward to inward. So Jesus would say, when you pray, you go into your room and you shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. So here, it is important to remember, we're not talking about necessarily a verbal communication. We are talking about that communication with God from spirit to spirit. We are connecting with God, not through our verbal language, but with the language of the heart. with the language of the Spirit. Because when Jesus says in secret, what is that secret? It is that place that belongs only to each one of us. It is the most precious place that each one of us will have, which is within us, our conscience, where the laws of God reside. That is the place where the rewards and the punishments and that communication comes from, our own conscience. That houses our innate ability to communicate to God. And he continues saying, I just put a few parts here in bold letters so then we can understand better. Do not heap up empty phrases. It is not what you say, but what you mean when you say. Your Father knows what you need before you ask. We think before we say. Our intentions, whatever is within our hearts, it appears to God before we even articulate our words. The source is our spirit. How we are going to do that is the consequence of what is within us, in our hearts. So here we have how to pray with our heart, with simplicity. We don't need empty words. We don't need anything special. We don't need special words. We don't need to read and write to pray. Intimately, with discretion. We don't need to show anybody. We're not praying for anybody else around us to see. That communication is between us and God. With faith, with fervor, with sincerity. If we are praying to God, it implies that we believe from the bottom of our hearts that God is here, that God exists, loves us, understands our needs, and will listen to us. And another example, like many examples from the gospel, is from the book of Luke, when he describes when Jesus was with his disciples in a temple. And then he draws the attention of the disciples to two individuals praying. And here is a beautiful, beautiful example that brings to light what Jesus is saying to us. Jesus says, see those two individuals praying. One was a doctor of the law, and one was back then a tax collector, which for many was considered a person with low morals, right? Because they would collect the taxes from people. They were hated by the citizens. And then there were the doctors of the law that were also revered, they were also respected, they were also feared by many. And the doctor of the law says, boasting, here I am to you, God. Let me continue being better. I do everything that the scriptures tell me to do. I follow all the rituals. Remember those altars? I follow all those rituals. Right? Let me not be unjust. Let not be like those other men, even like this tax collector. And he points to the tax collector. But the tax collector was standing right back, could not even put his head up. He was looking down. And Jesus draws the attention for the tax collector, who says, God be merciful of me. I'm a sinner. He was humbling himself to God. And Jesus says, I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. And that's when Jesus says, the ones who humble themselves will be exalted. The ones that exalt themselves will be humbled. The importance of humility, understanding our places in the creation, our places towards God and towards God's love, but also God's justice. We bring the concourse of good spirits when we pray. We bring the attention of the good spirits that are the messengers of God, that are the ones that execute the orders and the decrees that God gives. And they come close to us to uphold us in the good resolutions. They inspire us through good thoughts. Would the prayer take away from me my problems? Not necessarily, but they will make us stronger to face those adversities, solve them, and grow from them. The prayer will help us to give the moral strength that we need. So then we can, by ourselves, overcome our difficulties. God's graciousness and goodness and perfection is expressed even in the minimum things. God created us simple and ignorant, tending to perfection, and provides us with the moral strength to overcome our difficulties, to be stronger. Every time that we solve a problem, that we overcome difficulties, we become stronger. And through prayer also, we can become more alert to the troubles around us. We can divert the evils that we attracted themselves. How can we do that? By paying attention on our feelings, our intentions, by bringing to ourselves the awareness of who we are, of what is in our hearts. We then, through prayer, bring the concourse of good spirits, acquire moral strength, and are able to divert the evils that we attract because of our own faults. And finally, Jesus will tell us, true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. And now we can finally understand the meaning of worshiping in spirit and truth. That communication with God is not outward, doesn't need the words. In any culture, any language, from any part of the world, we can communicate with God because we communicate with God from our spirits. And in truth, because God knows our truth. And God, through allowing us to worship, also gives us the ability to listen to our truth and to be in contact with who we really are as spirits, with all the imperfections, but also with all the potentials that we have. So finally, is that a right way? Yeah, there is a right way. From the heart is the right way. In spirit and truth is the right way. Anything else is allowed. We can find the words that we believe fit better for us to articulate that communication? Yes, we can. Even if we don't know, we don't feel confident enough to pray only from our hearts, can we use words that already exist? If they mean something to us, if they touch our spirits, if they speak about our truth when we try to communicate with God, yes. And that's why Jesus gave us most beautiful example. If we should not repeat some words, Jesus would not have given those ones. But he gave, but he also prepared us before. As long as it comes from you, as long as that brings from you your true feelings, your true intentions, your true respect to God, expressing your true needs, and truly being thankful. We can use the words that we want, as long as they are the right vehicle to bring us closer to God. Thank you.
Wow. It's really remind us that we have all these natural laws in us. Remind us that how we can just come into our own minds and into our own hearts to find the words to communicate with God, because that's what we are trying to do. And by humbling ourselves, we forget the ego, we forget all the other things that in truth doesn't matter, because they are tools for us to uncover whatever imperfections we still have in us, and where do we have to grow, by humbling ourselves to us and to God especially. So thank you, Tiago, for reminding us, because sometimes we kind of repeat the words, we repeat the words. And my question to you, Tiago, to open up our roundtable here would be, on these past 3 years, almost 3 years, we've been going through a lot of turmoils with the pandemic, and now wars are coming up, and we kind of lose ourselves in the world as it is, in our own fears, in our own suffering from people that we know they're going through a lot of pain in their lives, and we too go through our own pain of witnessing what it is that we are today. And sometimes some people come to me and say, Sandra, I almost like lost my faith and I can't pray. So how would you answer for someone who is going through pain, a lot of pain, and they can't get close to God on those moments?
Right. That is that is a very good question, because I believe that those are the real challenges that somehow put to test that faith. And again, in times of need, we are allowed to ask. And maybe trying to help people to understand that, again, that prayer that we're talking about doesn't need to be that organized, structured prayer. It is talking about the truth. And if they are saying to us, I think I'm losing my faith, that means that they can tell God, I think I'm losing my faith, God. If they are able to articulate that to us, God already heard it. But it's difficult sometimes for us to make that transition. Again, it is to remind us that. In fact, if somebody tells me something and I said, well, you already prayed. If you are telling me that you are having difficulty, you are already praying. You don't need to do anything else, but continue doing that. It is to demystify that idea that we need to, that organization, that we need too much for the prayer. I don't need to go to any special place. The idea of praying intimately is because I can sit down in a park and do that. I can take a break from my work and do that. I can, before going to bed, when I'm in the silence of my room, do that. I can wake up getting ready. I can do that at any time. And if I am in difficulty, I can ask, how can I find that? Is there anything during the day that can be presented to me that is going to remind me that I need to continue having faith? Can I get some help today? Even today. Doesn't need to be, today. What can I do to help? The opportunity will arrive. And sometimes the opportunity will arrive when somebody in our house is sick. Because that is the message. Yes, maybe you cannot do much for the war necessarily, but you can do to prevent a war at home. And that will then spread that good feeling, that good energy everywhere around you. And if this is a ripple effect, that can potentially one day help in a big, in a macro way. But we start small because that's our range today, at home, dealing with the things that we can, making sure that we are being as well as we can be, protecting ourselves from more problem, from more danger, but with the simplicity, right? That's what I can think.
Yeah, sometimes we forget that we are still children, right? And we are his children. And we know the needs of our own kids. Like I'm a grandmother, so I know the needs of my kids, not all of them, but I know the needs of my granddaughters when I see them. So imagine this being that God is, that is so perfect, that he knows. So usually we think that we need too much, and sometimes we just need to recognize that we are his children, and he's going to be looking after me, even if I don't know that now I'm not capable of being close to him. He's still going to be close to me. And there'll be a time that the pain is going to pass, and then I can thank him, as you were telling us today. Thank you, Tiago. Anybody else, Joe, Rafael?
I was thinking while Thiago was talking. Well, this topic is always brings us to almost instantaneous state of meditation, because we start thinking and absorbing the words, because this is so important to all of us. And I was thinking in the way that, as Thiago was explaining, that we have been evolving and understanding what worshiping is. We're coming more and more to our own interior, to our own temple, instead of having idols that we go and put messages inside of it. Oh, I'm asking you to do this. It is very common. To this day, actually, there are some spirit centers where the people go, they write small notes, and they put in a small statue, even from Allan Kardec or someone. So we still have this exterior worshiping that we bring from ages ago, and how important it is for us to keep bringing this inside of us. So we go from idols, from formulas, to just being spontaneous and talk from the heart. And the next step will be not even using words. It's just you just turn on your thoughts. And after a while, you don't even have to turn on your thoughts. You'll be there already, all the time. You're already being constant communion. And I think from the time that we are living now, most of the time we forget how much we need that. As this, we call it God because we still have a little bit of this anthropomorphic concept. But this is it's an intelligence, a supreme intelligence that permeates the whole universe, and we came from it. So we were created from it. So when we worship, or even if no words, just when we think, we connect back to this intelligence that created us. So it's like we go in a closed loop, and we draw the strength that we need, not the physical strength, but the moral strength to overcome our difficulties. But we don't realize that we need that until we do it, till we really we force ourselves through discipline to stop and do it, and then we see, I really feel better. I really feel more calm, because we need the problem is still there. The problem is not going to go away. The pain is still there, but it seems that it focuses. It gives us focus. Okay, you can do this. You can do this. You can go through it. Even if you don't find a solution, or maybe at that time a solution comes to your mind, because the desperation go away. The desperation go away and frees space in your mind to see the solution for the problem that you're seeking to solve. Or if there's no solution, you just see that I can't do this. I can't take it, and I will continue moving forward. So and this can come from 1 minute of prayer. You don't even have to say anything. You just go to your room, you inside of you, stop and connect to God. Go to your mountain, elevate, go closer to God. Of course, not physically speaking, but and then you see how much we need that. If we just could remember that, I think the world will be easier.
Thank you, Jo. Thank you, Rafael. Tiago, would you like to have the last word and close this with a final prayer?
I'll be happy to.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like what you said, Joe. That truth is already known by God, but we are as imperfect as not knowing sometimes about ourselves. And how many times we hide from ourselves certain aspects that we don't like. But here we are through learning about the prayer and about the worship and about the unconditional love that God has for us. That there's no shame in understanding who we are, because that's the only way that we can come closer to us, that we can come closer to God. And for that, we just put it in practice right now with the intention to draw near to God, with having that intimate conversation, following our hearts and following our truth, showing ourselves who we really are to God, hoping and having faith that in turn, God will help us to see ourselves, not the way that we see ourselves, but the way that God sees us. God, may we see the light that you planted in us. May we see the divine that is within us since we were created by you. May we see our future selves through working on our present selves. May we be strong in the times of difficulty, like today. May our family, which is the human family, be stronger. May our actions have an effect on us, on our neighbors, on our communities, on our cities, on our countries. And may you, God, embrace us with your unconditional love. And may Jesus guide us through his divine lessons to all of us. We thank for being here. We ask for the ability to continue walking. And we praise, for we barely know how much has been granted to us every moment for us to be here. Thank you, and so be it.
So be it. Thank you, Tiago. Thank you,
Thank
Joe,
you.
Rafael. Thank you, everyone who were connected with us today through the internet. And hopefully we'll be seeing all of you next Sunday at 11:15 TSS time. Thank you. Have a
Have a good
nice
week,
day.
everybody.
Bye-bye.